turf towards me in her court shoes. My heart sank as swiftly as her heels in the grass. "Sure." I put down the watering can. As long as the word isn't P45. Thank goodness I'd only been singing quietly. "What can I do for you?" "Can you spare me 5 minutes?" she said with a jerk of her head. "My office." And without waiting for an answer, she spun on her heels and marched back towards the main building so fast that her flesh-coloured tights made a zipping noise where her thighs rubbed together. "I'll just tidy my tools away," I called after her. "Now you're for it." Alan looked up from his clipping, knocked his cap back off his forehead and winked. "Another one bites the dust, eh?" "Don't joke." My stomach swooped. I really need this job. I'd worked for my dad as a tree surgeon before moving to London, but there'd been nothing like that on offer locally when we come south last December, so that Harvey could set up his own personal training business in the capital. "Let's follow the money and move to London," he'd said, grabbing my hands, his eyes gleaming with pound signs. "I've got a mate with a flat we could rent." Everyone in London could afford personal trainers, he'd reckoned. Punters were cash-rich and time-poor, and would be falling over themselves to hand over said cash to be put through their paces. It would be a piece of low-fat, low-sugar cake to set up his own fitness consultancy down south. In fact, he'd said with a swagger, he'd probably have to take on staff within the first year. And it would do me good, he'd added, in a tone laced with mock rebuke, to finally cut the apron strings and stand on my own 2 feet. I'd been so proud of his ambitions and his self-assurance that I'd been swept along with it, not really thinking through what I'd do when I got to London. As it turned out, the streets hadn't been as richly paved with gold as he'd assumed, and it had been impossible to find enough wealthy clients to make ends meet, so when the gym he'd joined advertised for staff, he took the job to tide him over. He was still there, and the tiny flat that his friend had rented to him as a stopgap was scarcely more than a bedsit, and, although Harvey insisted on paying for it himself, I suspected the rent was triple what my sister Evie and her husband Darren's mortgage cost for their 3-bedroomed house in Fernfield. Needless to say, we were still there. But Harvey had been right about one thing. It had been time for me to leave home. Dad and I had become too reliant on each other. He took on a business partner when I left, a man who could do the aerial cutting that I'd always done. And although I wouldn't go so far as to say I was deliriously happy right now, I'd managed to survive 6 months in the capital, living and working with someone other than a family member. Not bad for a confirmed homebird like me. I stowed my garden tools safely where they couldn't cause injury to the public and scurried after Paula. I caught up with her just as she reached the authorised personnel only door in the side of the building and pulled it open for her. "Good weekend?" I asked, using my question as an opportunity to scan her face for clues as to what sort of mood she was in. She stopped and leaned on the doorframe to flick clumps of mud from her shoes. I took the hint and wiped my wet boots on the mat. Paula sighed. "The weekends are never long enough, are they? No sooner do we finish on a Friday afternoon than—" She clicked her fingers. Snap. Monday morning rolls back around and we're off again. Noses to the grindstone. Too true. I tried to smile rather than grimace. I daren't tell her that just lately my weekends had stretched to an interminable length, as Harvey had become increasingly bad-tempered and, yes, I was going to admit it to myself, erratic. One minute he'd be squeezing the living daylights out of me, declaring that I was his soulmate and he couldn't live without me. The next he'd fly into a huge sulk after I made an innocuous comment about a work colleague. It was a relief to come back to work every Monday, knowing that because of my early starts and his late finishes at the gym, it would be Saturday before I had to spend many waking hours with him. And if I was lucky, he'd be doing the weekend shift, and I could have a few hours to myself. After I'd helped him design leaflets and deliver them to several hundred houses in the neighbourhood, I'd run out of things to do and had wanted to look for a job. Harvey said he felt humiliated that he couldn't afford for me to stay at home, and I remember kissing him and saying with a laugh that it was no longer the 1950s and I didn't expect him to bankroll me. I think that was the day of our first row.